So welcome back to Brown. We want you here all the time. So feel free to visit all the time. But we could start a lot of places, but I want to start with Baltimore.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to go way back. And I've heard you say in a couple of places that your own experiences in school there and sort of transitions from predominantly white schools to some different types of schools were sort of early influences in helping you think about your work. Maybe you can share a little bit about that with us.
Sure, yeah, so I'm a proud daughter of Baltimore, much like Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Yeah, if she gets to claim it, I think you definitely get to claim it.
Right?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I went to elementary school at a private school called the McDonough School. And shout out,
Wow.
which, like most, private schools, are predominantly white. And I was one of a few black kids who went there, but elementary school. And then I left there and went to magnet middle school called Falstaff Middle School. Yeah, Kippy. Kippy was there.
It's unbelievable. Okay.
And that was a more traditional public school where it's majority black, but there was still large, at the time, constituencies of non-black students, white students, heavy population of Jewish students, and just it was racially diverse. And from there, I went to a magnet school in Baltimore Western High School, which was, by that point, about 85% black, all female, by the way, which was also very cool. And you could start to see just in this transition the effects of white flight from Baltimore, period, but also from the public schools in Baltimore, and that's happened in many cities. And you could also see the stratification. So there were always there were many, like different tracks, right? So there was, in my high school, there was, the A course and the B course and the C course and the A course where you were really college prep. And that, despite the school being about 85% black, the A course was probably about 50% black.
I see, right. So it wasn't evenly distributed,
it was not evenly distributed, and so those just sort of paying attention to these dynamics, and I also happened to be the student commissioner on the school board when I was in high school, high school senior. So, I was just a little bit plugged into the disparities in education funding for the city versus other schools in the state of Maryland, and the outcomes that were not surprising, commensurate with that school funding. So it sort of set me on this path to think about race and then gender, identity broadly, and its relationships to academic outcomes. And then I came to Brown and social class came online. Because I was like, wait a minute, people have their own cars?
Yeah. And then they were like, honey, that's just the beginning.
Right. The giveaway car was the Saab. And I was like, what? That's the giveaway car?
Yeah, that's a heck of a moment. I was like, what is a country house? I remember that.
I
was like, what does that mean? What does that mean?
Yes. When summer became we summer.
Yeah, it's an activity, not a season. Yeah. All right, let's stop there. This could get we could get distracted with that. So your work has been really instrumental in helping think through what it means to diversify spaces and how complicated that is. And so we titled this, the Perils and Promise, because it's not as easy as people think. It's much more complicated. But before we go into what makes it so doggone difficult, let's just, if you could share for a few minutes, what does diversity bring? Because, some people just think, okay, we have to do it, but they don't actually have an argument for why it's important. And you've written about this specifically.
Yes, so diversity is important for any number of reasons. The first is we do have to do it.
Yeah.
It is a social justice imperative. You cannot maintain a at least democratic society if you are not making investments in the members of that society, that population broadly, and investing in the education, the well-being, the green spaces, all of the economic prosperity of the people as they show up. in your community, society, school, neighborhood, pick a level of analysis. So it is a moral imperative to invest in all of the people, and that means diversifying the spaces that have the most access to upward mobility. And those have traditionally been schools, obviously the public schools, but also public and private universities. And if you fail to do that, then you are, and it's not you, we, because it's up to us as citizens of this country and people who care about our democracy to insist that these spaces, that the access to the economic prosperity of the nation is broadly distributed. And so that requires efforts to maintain or create the diversity of these spaces. You know, it's just important to. Of course, that's hard, right? Just as I am, as a young person, navigating these different spaces that I found myself in, both educational and then my sort of extracurricular. I studied ballet for 13 years in Baltimore, and you know, that's not the blackest thing. No. So, you know, it tells you who you are when you confront people who are not like you. It helps you and forces you to think about, what do you value? You know, you don't know that there are other types of people who celebrate other holidays, who eat other kinds of foods until you meet them. And it's not just an exercise in, oh, isn't that interesting? It's a, well, why do we do what we do, right? It makes you question, you know, in a good way. Why is it that we do X, Y, and Z? Why is it that we have, right? And that process of questioning, especially when it happens a little bit later in life, it's hard. But no matter when it happens, it's hard.
But some of your research and the general field suggests that while it's challenging up front, which we'll talk about, it's actually also what lowers prejudice in the long run.
Absolutely.
So that exposure is important. And of course, you've also said that it helps with creativity.
That's right.
Right? Because we can't problem solve if we've all had the identical experiences.
Exactly. So having different types of people bring different ideas, perspectives to bear on any problem, it's harder to solve the problem because you have to get on the same page. But you get a better answer.
Exactly.
So it's both
you get
and.
more than one answer.
Yep, I say this all the time. People are like, so the diversity, your work, it's tiring. People leave exhausted. It's hard. And I'm like, yeah, it's just like exercise. It's tiring, exhausting, it's hard, but you know, we know it's good for us.
It allows you to eat more cake.
It allows us to be healthier, yes.
No, just eating more cake. That's really all it's for, but no, I get No. Well, actually, the metaphor is that when you get done with all that exercise, you know, things feel like cake, you know, you'll feel better. But when we think about diversity, there's so much, is almost sort of a moral, you know, rah, you know, we have to have diversity, and everyone's all excited, and they're not quite prepared for how difficult it's going to be. And, you know, where your work, I think, has been extremely powerful is in really drilling down on what makes it so difficult. And so you identify a number of things, and then if you could just unpack them for people. So you identify increased tensions, increased social isolation, and social identity threat as three significant factors. So increased tension, so these are the difficulties that we face trying to do this work. So can you unpack those three?
Yeah, I can try. I've actually, you know, been thinking about this a lot lately. And why, this larger question of why are we so surprised that diversity is hard? And I think in part because and this is sort of, you know, as the old saying, the solution to a problem creates new problems. So actually the extent to which we have embraced diversity is societally across broad swaths of the nation is really great. But people think it's, you know, it's no big deal. It's not hard to do. So that's part of the problem. We don't actually acknowledge how difficult it is. And if we thought about it for just, you know, 5 more minutes, and we said, you know, actually, you know what diversity is? You know what diversity has always been? It's been integration.
Then we're like, oh, that's really
that's hard, right? Because we know that's hard, right? We have the pictures of it. We know that was incredibly difficult for those young, you know, black kids to show up where they weren't wanted. But we know that they faced harassment and bullying and all manner of insults. And so we never thought it was easy for them, and we didn't think it was easy for the white students who were already there.
Right, but the difference is, and you talk about this too in other places, that at that point, the assumption was that integration was necessary to fight just bigotry and hatred, not structured privilege and hierarchies. So now people think they're past bigotry and hatred.
Yes.
And so diversity shouldn't be hard because they like people of color and they have black friends and they so on and so forth. Oh yeah, no, that's the one. Yeah, I'll let you talk. Go into that too. But that's the idea, right? Yeah. And that it's not actually necessary, right? Because there's no more. So there's a sense in which they knew integration was hard because it was in their mind it was about something else.
Right. When it was about some other people.
Right. That too.
So I think we need to just remind ourselves that no, actually, it's always been us.
Right.
It's always been about us.
Right.
And we actually have never had at least a sustained moment where any space, especially not even public spaces, were consistently diverse and were able to stay that way, right? There was transitions. Black students came in, Latino students came in, and then white students left, right? Parents took them out. That's whether it's schools, whether it's neighborhoods, and to some extent, even workspaces, and this is true for gender too. The conversations we're having about gender and STEM, science, technology, engineering, math. The more women come in, men in those spaces, on average, are feeling threatened.
Right.
What does this mean for us? What does this mean for our profession? If we've been, does it change the status? And often it does. When women join an occupation, the actual status of the occupation is perceived to go down. Right? So this stuff is not easy. It's complicated because we've been doing it a certain kind of way for a long time.
Right.
And it's hard for us to let go of those beliefs. So that's one side. The other is for people of goodwill, for people who do understand themselves to be non-prejudiced. Having to confront the difficulty, the discomfort, the anxiety, and even the stereotypes that might come to mind automatically when you encounter different types of people, that's personally threatening, right?
Yeah.
So if you were a bigot, you're like, well, yeah, I know I think this about those people. And I can tell you that. If you're actually non-prejudiced, but you don't have a lot of experience with interracial contact, which is most of us, right? We still grow up in separate spaces. Then you meet somebody or people of a different group for the first time, and all of this stuff comes up. Nervous, anxious, stereotypes. A little bit, I don't quite know what the rules are here.
Right.
And I actually really don't want to appear prejudiced, right, to myself or to them.
Right.
That's a lot in one to have to take on for one conversation.
Yeah.
Right. And that, so then people don't persist in them because they're confronted with what could be. As opposed to if you would just persist in them, you would realize it's an opportunity to learn about these other folks and to actually get better. We act like we're supposed to know what to do when we've never had experience, and we don't do that for anything else. Like we would never say, oh, by the way, your roommate's from France. And I know you don't know anything about French people or French anything, but good luck, but if you make any mistakes or even ask questions, that means you're probably a bigot. Like we would never do that.
Yeah,
right? But we do that all the time. We raise the stakes.
Right. Well, okay, so let me push a little. I totally agree, but I'm going to push just for the sake of entertainment. Because, at the same time, I've had students, I think, legitimately complain about the fact that many of their dominant group students, whether, my Black and Latinx students in particular point this out, that they have to keep educating their roommates. They have to keep educating their peer groups, their teachers, right? So it's not like, hey, I've never been to France and I don't know once. It's like over and over and over again, every year, every person, every new situation. There's a kind of, perpetual I don't know-ism, which is a different kind of burden. Do you see what I mean? That makes the diversity work different. So it's not just the, hey, I don't know, it's that my not knowing is part of the privilege in the first place in this context. So how is your work sort of distinguished between these two contexts?
Yeah, so it doesn't in the sense of what it feels like to have these sort of high stakes interactions. So that's sort of one, and why it's often so challenging.
Right.
That doesn't absolve people, and by people, again, I mean us, of the responsibility
Right.
for recognizing
Right.
that it's actually not the burden of folks of color or people of a different faith
Right.
or whatever other category that's not mine and historically and systematically subjugated to teach me about everything.
Right.
Right? That's actually not their job, right? It's my job if, as I said, I am somebody of goodwill. I believe myself to not be prejudiced, which should mean I'm going to work hard to not be prejudiced. Not
Right.
I was born not prejudiced, and so I probably still am. Right?
Right,
That's a false belief.
Yeah.
Right? It's
Yeah.
like no. If you've been walking around the smog of this culture,
Right.
I can tell you right now, you got it in your head.
Right.
And that's where it is. It's not in the heart, by the way. That's a bad metaphor too. We got to let that one go.
Yeah.
Prejudice is in the head.
Yeah, not in the air.
Not in the heart, right?
Right.
It's not this deep hatred, right? That's
Right.
an Archie Bunker model, right? That's some people have it there,
Yeah.
right? But all of us have it in the mind, in
Yeah.
the brain,
Yeah.
and that is going even without our best intentions.
So what makes diversity hard in this case for dominant groups, so in this case we're talking about race, it would be whites predominantly, it makes it hard because they don't want to appear prejudiced, they don't want to do anything prejudiced. How is this work hard for young people of color?
Yeah.
Right? For
Yeah.
Black and Latinx students?
Well, I mean, partly what you described, having to constantly either help someone along,
Right.
learn a little bit about, who we are, and more importantly, who we are not,
Right.
Because people come with stereotypes.
Right.
And then on top of that, especially at a place like Brown, you're one of very few numbers of
Right.
people, right? So you're constantly trying to navigate the landscape of college, which is a challenging one.
In itself.
And then you also have this extra concerns and considerations about stereotypes that people might have of you, and by people, not just classmates, your professors,
Right.
right? Do they actually think that Black people are X? I mean,
Yeah.
so a short little side story, when I went to the week before I was going to start graduate school at Harvard in the psychology department, a little known book called The Bell Curve came out. And one of the authors...
Welcome to the profession. Huh?
Yes, one of the authors was a member of the Harvard faculty. And I'm already I'm not quite sure how I got into this thing to begin with. I'm not sure even what I'm getting myself into.
Right.
But then I'm the only Black student in the department,
Whoa.
period, right? Not just my class, the
Yeah.
department. So I'm walking into a situation
Wow.
that is unique, right? I'm on my own, a Black girl from Baltimore, right? We're not trying
Right.
to change that. And there's an esteemed senior faculty member who has just published a book that fundamentally questions Black's intelligence on average, right?
Yeah.
And that's
Not
where
you
I'm walking in.
personally.
Not me personally,
Yeah.
but it felt real
Yeah,
personal.
of course it's personal.
Right?
Yeah.
It felt
Yeah.
really personal.
Yeah.
And so that recognizing that that's a disproportionate burden that some students are carrying,
Right.
that others don't have to, is part of, as educators, what we need to do. Right?
Yeah.
And what we need to address
Right.
and acknowledge, and to the best that we can, stand up for a faculty member when there are colleagues who are publishing books and
Like
works
that.
like that,
Yeah.
right? So, I had nothing to do with this, but Professor Herrnstein passed away the week before, the day after we started or something. It wasn't me.
Wow. They say don't mess with sisters. Now
I was like, I'm just saying.
Lord,
It
have
wasn't
mercy.
me.
So you didn't even have to not take his class.
I did not.
Okay.
I didn't have to.
Well,
But nevertheless,
yeah.
again, we need to think about it, right? So, but there were
But there's a-
25 faculty members
Right.
who were all his colleagues, and there was a memorial and all these things, and I did not know. I had to learn one by one which agreed with him and which did not.
Right.
Right? Because there's no public
Lineup,
conversation
right.
or adjudication of it. Right?
Exactly. And you talk about this kind of context as a cognitive tax, right?
That's right.
That it's a very cognitively taxing environment. And when I've heard you talk about it and also read your work on it, you talk about how it's not just limited to that subject or that environment. Once you're taxed and you feel like your entire intelligence or whatever else is
Yep.
really under threat, then it actually makes it harder for you to do many other things. Can you talk about that? Because I think people don't often imagine that this stuff bleeds out into everything. Yeah.
Sure, yeah. I mean, once you are in this mindset of considering your competency in a space, right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, it's everything. It's not just the classes, it's the campus, it's all of it. And you're sitting doing a lot of work. Well, does that person agree? Well, their work sounds like it might be consistent with his, so there's not just that. Should I take this person's class? Do I even have a shot? Right? Well, I know that I can't,
Can I make the same mistakes?
can I make any mistakes?
Right.
Can I demonstrate vulnerability? Because is that going to read as, well, we knew,
Can you say you don't
she
know?
couldn't make
Right.
it,
Right.
I mean, we sort of,
We knew, right.
am I here because they knew the bell curve was going to come out, and they're like, well, we can't have the bell curve come out and have no black students, right?
Yeah.
Right? You cannot, all of this extra that's extra work that you're
Right.
doing instead of just being a student.
Right.
Right? I mean, most of the time before my students take an exam, and all students in class with me, I just say, okay, now take a minute to just quiet your mind. Turn the volume down on whatever concerns and considerations you might be having.
Right.
Free it up
Right.
and just take the test, right? Because
Right.
when you're taking the test and you're doing all this other stuff, right, which we're often doing rightly, right? It's not,
No,
a
it's
fault.
Right.
It's harder, and you do worse on the test.
Right.
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 Like,
And that performance isn't just one test, it's a whole way of
It's-
engaging with
exactly.
the classes, with the work.
Right. It's the potential that people see in you where they don't see.
Right.
It's the extra shots you get because you've come in as promising, surely this person's a star, versus we'll give him a chance.
Right. Versus I don't know how he got in even though he's doing the exact same performance level as someone else.
Exactly.
Yeah. So this is really important because, the act of trying to diversify is one thing, but this is what the work is really about. So now people have to figure out, it's not just how they evaluate students, but how they evaluate their own process of evaluation.
That's right.
And I've noticed in my own work on diversity here and elsewhere that it's actually getting people who were previously not being confronted with this work, who are in authority, to really interrogate their process, because the more expert you are at something, the harder it is to convince yourself that you might be a novice at something important, or that your process, of hiring people or people who know people who one step removed, might not be the best way to find everyone. And in fact, people who are experts will say, if I don't already know them, there can't be anybody I'm missing who's excellent, because I know all the excellent people because I'm so excellent. Therefore, it's so facto, So this is a real challenge to that. And so, how, has that part of the puzzle come up in your work, and what? Yeah, kind of a marshmallow question.
Well,
just
less
like
in my work than in my day to day, right?
Yeah.
Of course, that is
Right.
the case, right? Trying to, when you're trying to expand opportunity, the only way to do it is to change the policies and practices and procedures that you're currently using, and to recognize that it is not necessarily the case that what we've been doing to recruit new faculty and students, in, for instance, graduate students and new faculty, it's not that has been unsuccessful in terms of the talent. Right? It has been unsuccessful because of all the talent we're missing. Right? So we're too happy to look at what we've been doing and say, well, it's worked out. Well, of course it's worked out. You've only selected from Harvard, Princeton, Yale, and Stanford, and people who are known and know the tricks of the trade. In fact, it's lazy, right? We're not expanding opportunity. We're not even looking, and we're actually not developing talent. Right? And why do we? I mean, I did say this in a faculty meeting. Why are we so unsure of whether we could cultivate talent as opposed to just attracting it already, fully formed? Why aren't we in the business of cultivating talent, developing talent? Who's better to do it, right? Every now and then they got to play on the, self-assurance to change the game a little bit.
Exactly. And the other thing that's interesting is that what we don't do in our profession, this is not part of her research, but it's maybe it will be.
My life.
Yeah, it's your life. what we don't do is look at things we missed. We don't look back at who we didn't hire.
That's right.
Or who we didn't admit
right.
and see where they are 10 years later. Sometimes they've whooped the pants off of the people,
That's right.
myself included. I'm like, I got this job and that person didn't get them. Like, oh my God, maybe they want it back. maybe I should. But that, and that's really where the question is. It isn't always where you are at the beginning. It's where you're going to turn up. So I'm wondering if this sort of, if diversity is equally stressful for everyone involved. I mean, not to create more hierarchies, but I'm just wondering, have you been able to measure whether or not it's just, because it would, when you think about how to implement it, you'd have to talk to different constituencies differently about what their work is going to be and what their struggles are going to look like, right?
Yeah, so I do, because it is a different struggle for being whatever is culturally dominant and numerically dominant in a space and whatever's not. And it does, so obviously that affects things. It also is the case, again, especially at these universities that we spend our time in, that the students of color in particular at these places, or the faculty, have actually done this more. We have more experience in navigating diversity. We can actually move to different spaces fairly fluidly because you cultivate a skill set. And in fact, just like we think studying abroad is good for students because it makes them think differently about who they are, about the United States, about their experiences. It makes them grow. Well, you know who's doing basically the same thing? You. A bunch of students of color, faculty of color all the time. So we're actually developing, skill sets.
We should have a passport for this.
We should have a passport for this.
I think we need a passport. It'd be like, when you need a new one, you'd be like, this how many times I left my country of origin.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But if we thought about developing that set of skills as fundamental to what we should be doing as college faculty administration, and honestly before that, we'd actually think differently about the lack of diversity of our public schools, about where we choose to live, If it were, how much intercultural of any kind of experience have you had, if that were part of the scores that get you admitted to this kind of college? Trust and believe. A whole set of different people. Opportunities would be made available, and actually it would be compulsory. And so we just don't think about it that way. We think about it as an add-on. When actually it's critical.
And actually, for predominantly minority schools, we think about access to white schools as them getting better access to a global experience and better education. But the reverse, there's nothing to be gained.
That's right.
So, but on campuses, my experience, I teach issues of race and ethnicity, so the students in my class are not only diverse in terms of what groups they come from, but they're interested in these issues. But I have found, piping around to my colleagues' classes, that you could just be white and never leave an all-white world at Brown and Harvard and Yale, anywhere else. So how do we prevent, even with all the diversity that all these schools are doing, with undergraduate populations that are a third various forms of people of color, that's a significant number. And yet you can self-select into the same homogeneous group that you've had. Now, again, I don't think the students of color can do that because they have to go to class, and we're only a few of us.
That's right.
Right? And they have to have roommates. But so what do you say, is the way to create the context for more constant interaction that would be eventually less stressful and hopefully more productive?
Yeah, so actually educational spaces are universities are one of the only places where students from everywhere have an opportunity to meet students from everywhere. So I think we should recognize that as actually a value. And encourage people when they get here to embrace it, not flee, basically, and hide and stay in a safe space. But also, again, there's a reason why Econ 10 is one of the most popular classes at Harvard, because they have decided that Economics 10, Intro Economics, is vital. And you sort of get there, and the buzz, the conversation, advisors, everyone's like, well, you have to take this class. It's an important class. What if we said that about, you actually need to know something about African American history, because I know you didn't get it in high school, and this is foundational to American history. That's required. You should
Right.
not leave. You are not a well-educated person
Right.
if you have not taken that class. What if you
Yeah.
just engaged in that, right?
Yeah.
Because we decide what's important.
Exactly. No, that would be great. That would really help. And then, I think figuring out that we need to sort of educate people that diversity work is hard.
That's right.
And that, as you said, you shouldn't expect to go to the gym and not break a sweat.
That's right. Or get your feelings hurt.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's true.
That's me at the gym.
Yeah. I was going to say, note to self, don't work out with Jennifer.
No,
okay, yeah.
No, I get my feelings hurt.
Yeah.
I'm like, wait a minute, I only have 10 minutes on this thing.
I know, and you're like, I need 30 more. So I want to turn for the last few minutes to the contemporary political landscape that we're in. I've only saved 10 minutes for that because I can only take 10 minutes of that at a time. My news feed is like, never mind, let's not even go here.
It's tough.
So, what's happening here and around the world is in many ways, it seems an outgrowth of the kind of work you're doing. That people's discomfort with the diversification of the various parts of the world where this kind of right-wing populism is becoming very powerful, is connected to this discomfort and connected to the ways in which it produces social identity threat, as you call it. And I'm wondering if you have thought about how to either intervene or how it relates to your work. Let's just start there, and then I have some follow-up thoughts.
Yeah,
questions.
so that's, again, thinking about what we're currently witnessing in this country and across the globe, especially in Europe, the reemergence of vocal, unapologetic white nationalism, fascism. It's terrifying, and it's it's a little too early to be alarmist, but there are cocktails later. I think it's really it's important to recognize that this is not unconnected to the rapidly shifting demographics of our nation, and more importantly, the talk about it. Right? The projections of a so-called majority-minority country that America is allegedly going to become. I'm a skeptic of whether that's going to happen, in part because race is made up.
It's mutable.
So we can easily make some more white people to make sure that doesn't happen. Just categorize people differently, right?
Yep.
That's not a problem for us. We do that.
We've done it before.
We also have seen concern about this shift lead to the election of people whose only project is to decrease immigration from certain places and increase it from others to maintain a white national state. And they're clear about it. They're not pretending that this is not the case, right? To deport lots of people, to change to maintain the population, to disenfranchise. So again, the democracy that we think that we have will cease to be. It's already in certain places. And so I think we have to care about our own ability to navigate diversity and that of our kids and of our neighbors and our community members, because it's vital if we are going to maintain an American democracy.
Right.
There's no other choice. Either we're going to get this right as the country gets more diverse, right? And where it is now, or we're not, and we're not going to have an American democracy. And we have to choose.
And definitely. So, the Democrats and people in general in the liberal, quadrant and on the left, I would say, don't seem to have a better understanding about how important it is to prepare people for diversity work than academics do. And I remember when Obama first got elected, I was scared to death. And I think I ultimately was right about why, because this whole scenario doesn't make any sense without even an unconscious deep fear of the idea of what he meant. Not his policies, mind you, which were, whatever, neoliberal for the most part, but as the symbolic resonance. And I remember thinking, a nice sort of liberally leftist white guy would have gone a lot longer without all this backlash, which I was afraid of happening. But I never thought it would be Trump because I didn't have that level of creativity. if I had that level of creativity,
Yeah.
I would definitely be playing the stock market because that would be very successful. But, but I guess, did you think about, I mean, have you been able to figure out how much of this is really the result of Obama or any black president?
Yeah, well, it's the combination. So Obama happened at the same time, interestingly, and I actually asked, I know the guy at the census who sort of runs the race beat. So in 2008, that was the first year that they actually published something about the projected majority minority population. Same time. And I'm like, what are you thinking? It's a black guy, he's very nice, his name is Nicholas. And really, they were doing it in a sort of nerdy demographer. Isn't this interesting? The country is changing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, it is interesting, but everything we know from sociology and social psychology suggests that this is going to freak out a lot of people.
Yeah.
Maybe you should back away from just this projection.
We don't need to know everything.
Well, we also you know, and this is where I, sort of duke it out with democracy. So they've come around now, they've seen what's happened. It's a projection, which means you're saying something about how people are going to identify, or you're ignoring it, which is what they were doing.
Right.
You're saying something about rates of intermarriage. You're saying something about rates of population growth, people having babies. You're saying a lot, right? Which means you're guessing.
Yeah.
A lot
about the future.
And then you're trying to say something concrete.
Right.
And then they're like, well, yeah, you're right, And so they did stop. So, Q1 for impact. They stopped putting out these projections, but it's out of the, the cat is out of the bag, right? And so they freak people out. And then it also happened at a time of economic downturn, right? That's also 08. So people are already feeling vulnerable economically.
Yeah.
Right. And we've now overlaid on this a concern about America not being what it was in my nostalgic past. Right. In part because of shifting demographics.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's a lot. So people who, up to this point, were on board for diversity and certainly consider themselves egalitarian and believe in it, were suddenly open to a different argument. Right. And that argument was readily available on the internet and then became very vocalized by people like Trump and his team, and that's white nationalism. That's maintain an America. We're going to bring back an America that you knew that you and your children would have a future in. You knew where you'd stand. There's some economic prosperity. Now, of course, they were lying, right? But that sounds really good, right? And getting back to what you said about the folks on the left, they weren't speaking to this group at all. Right. And if anybody said anything, it was like, just get over it. Right. This is what it is. Right. Right? Well, I can choose. Yeah. People who are going to make America great again for me and mine, or people who say, get over yourself. Right. Who are you going to choose? Right.
And that's why what you've talked about, why it's so important to think about why diversity is hard work helps us emphasize it's sort of like an implementation plan. That's right. Right, an ongoing strategy. You have to sort of focus on that to avoid this kind of almost an arrogance of expectation. Right. So what would you recommend? And then we have a couple minutes, I hope, for questions before. We'll have about 5 minutes. But what advice would you give us? People in this room who adore your work, who went to school with you, and also others who are just probably trying to figure out, how to turn peril into promise. Yes. Right? What are a couple of things we should focus on?
Yeah, so I think, a couple things concrete. One, get comfortable with discomfort. Right. So one thing that happens with being in a diverse space is everybody's uncomfortable a little bit, and that's part of what it means, right? And I think that we're used to it's the students of color who are integrating, who are feeling uncomfortable, and now you know what? It's democratized, right? Everybody's uncomfortable, and you know what? That's okay. We don't have to protect certain kids, who now are disproportionately white, wealthy, male, straight. They're going to get called out. They're going to get roughed up a little bit in college. It's going to be okay, right? Yeah. They're going to come out the other side far more competent to navigate a diverse space, right? Right. For them. Also for us. Right. Don't maintain. Most people have absolutely no contacts, no ties outside of their own racial group. Most adults.
Right, but there's a big gap between whites and other.
Well, yeah.
Like a big
that's
gap.
Right. That's right. But even many of us.
Yeah, that's true.
Segregate our social lives, our volitional lives.
Right.
We should not do that.
Right.
Right. We should, and it takes something of you to go in a space that's
Right.
not familiar, that's different,
Uncomfortable.
that's uncomfortable. So that, and then I think, really, it's important right now in this moment to recognize that we are literally in this together.
Yeah.
Right. We're not going to get our way out of this moment that we're in by ignoring the things that we have that are different.
Right.
How our circumstances are different, because we care about our ethnic ties, we care about our racial, histories and communities. We care about our religion ties, and so yes, these are all things that we have that differ, but we have this American project in common. And it's actually when you get to know somebody who's different from you, and you hear their story of why they're here and what they hope for in their lives or for their kids, that you actually see the commonalities. We assume them, or we assume that we don't have them when we don't know anybody who's different. So diversity is tough. It makes us uncomfortable, but it helps us know who we are better, and it actually helps us affirm our values better.
Right, and connects us to other people,
Exactly.
because underneath it, there's much more in common than we think.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.